So let's do that because I do believe that in 20 years grid will be powered. I don't think the grid is going away. I don't think we want the grid to go
No,
away
we do
necessarily.
not.
But I think as solar will be the main source of powering the grid with probably 100, if not more, times nodes of power production than we have today. And most of that will be solar stored into local storage or regional storage. So what are the issues along the way? So, and how do we solve them?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on one earlier, Karim. You were talking about frequency, and
Yeah.
there's, just to kind of like level set, there is a fundamental relationship between frequency and load. And of course, when I'm talking about frequency, I'm talking about the, 60 hertz, so 60 cycles per second on the in U.S. electric grids, 50 hertz in most of world markets. But it's that yeah, it's that frequency of the AC waveform that we're talking about on the electric grid that we build
Mhm.
all of our systems around. And our electric grids have a very tight tolerance actually for the level of fluctuations in frequency that we can tolerate. And this all sort of comes back to how our electric grid was constructed, sort of built around 20th century technologies.
Yeah.
But the fundamental relationship between frequency and load is an important one to kind of understand. So a sudden increase in load will decrease the overall frequency of the system,
Sure.
just like a sudden decrease in load would increase the frequency of the system. And so conversely, a sudden decrease in generation will cause the frequency to decrease substantially as well,
Yeah.
and drastically, in fact. And that really kind of is the fundamental principle that we're trying to solve, or the problem we're trying to solve is preventing that rapid collapse of frequency when there is an issue, a major issue on the grid. We lose a generator and
Is that
we
this?
prevent that
Is that
crash.
is that the scenario that can crash the whole grid?
Absolutely.
That
Yeah,
is,
absolutely.
yeah. And what happens if, so, I mean, even like, just think of a very concentrated, huge solar farm, big cloud comes over it. That could even crash the grid then on a,
No, because that's not really messing too much with it's not messing enough with the level of frequency drop that we would be concerned about.
it
Uh,
wouldn't be happening fast enough. Like
yeah,
you would have a
no,
failure of
we're
the
really
power.
we're talking about millisecond speeds here. It's
Okay.
incredibly fast, and so. But you're right in a sense that inverters, grid connected inverters, have had to sort of evolve over time. We used to, anytime there was a weird blip on the grid, the inverters used to have to drop, to
Yeah.
cut off, and then they would wait 5 minutes before they would come back online and check in. Is everything stable now? That was
Yeah.
a requirement under the UL standard 1741,
Yeah.
and we realized that wasn't that worked for a period of time, but it wasn't sustainable to allow us to continue to grow more and more deployments of solar and other types of inverter-based resources on our grids. So we started introducing smart inverter capabilities, things like voltage ride through, frequency ride through, these kinds of things, volt var, where we can sort of inject either active or reactive power into the grid as the conditions would warrant. And that definitely helped create a less instability for sure, but definitely didn't go far enough to solve the frequency problem, which is really caused by a massive loss of a generator failure. And fortunately, these are fairly uncommon, but when they do occur, they can really be a serious problem. There was a recent event in Australia where an entire natural gas generator, it blew. I mean, literally blew up. There was shrapnel,
Oh,
hundreds and hundreds of yards away. And in fact, even but it doesn't necessarily have to be that big of an event. There's a really interesting report that was published by NERC about well, they call it the Odessa disturbance. I'm sure there was been more than one disturbance in Odessa over the years, but this is we're talking about Texas, and this is a particular fault that occurred on a power line there that ended up creating a cascading result that took more than a gigawatt of solar offline, and that's not how we are supposed to be behaving fundamentally. And so NERC did a really good job doing a deep dive into this. How did this happen? And quite honestly, it sort of comes back to the people that are configuring these systems. Are they actually configured properly to create that level of stability and ride through? Are the operators of these plants did they knowledgeable in how to operate them in a way that prevent them from going offline like that after a fairly minor grid disturbance, grid event? And so, yeah, that's really kind of leads us into this topic of inertia and sort of how inertia creates stability and strength for the electric grid. Fundamentally, inertia, it's Newtonian physics, and an object in motion wants to stay in motion, right? And so it's incredibly important that we have a certain level of inertia on our electric grids to create this sort of stability that prevents us from experiencing a rapid collapse of frequency. And maybe I'll use an analogy here. It's you're imagine going along on a train, and you're riding along on a train, and it's all of a sudden you come to an immediate stop. I mean, I'm having a hard time kind of thinking about how that would happen. I guess if there was another train with the same velocity and mass, and they both crashed head on, you'd have a pretty bad day, I would think, if you were riding on that train. So, but that's of course not really what happens. When you slam on the brakes on a train, there's a sort of slow screech that occurs probably over miles of distance. But that's what we're talking about here is really creating that slowing down when there is a problem on the grid. And the longer you can sort of create maintain that deceleration, the better it is, because it allows other systems to come online and correct that problem with backup systems. But if the trains were to suddenly stop altogether, that would be very, very big problem. That would be hard to recover from. And so
that would be a massive shutdown of the grid. And then to bring that back up, you would have to do it in like subsectors slowly.
Dark starting little nodes of the grid, and it would be a massive problem, not too dissimilar from what we saw in a winter storm in Texas a few years back too, right? So we need to be able to prevent those things from happening. And so the fundamental problem is that inverters typically don't behave like a conventional fossil fuel generator, which is actually using
they don't have the rotating
motion. Exactly. There is a rotating mechanism, a physical mass. There is this literal inertia happening when that turbine is rotating. And of course, what it's doing is it's connected to a generator. The generator is creating an AC waveform because it has an electromagnet that's being rotated through a series of wires, and that's creating our AC grid. And so when there is a big disturbance or something that could potentially create a drastic drop in frequency, believe it or not, it is that sort of gradual slowing, that decelerization, we call it dampening, that actually creates enough stability to prevent a drastic, sort of instantaneous drop in frequency. The technical term in our industry is ROCOF, rate of change of frequency. We really want to try to prevent a sudden drop in frequency. We really want to try to get that slope more gradual as the frequency declines, so that we allow more time for other backup systems to kick in. That's really the critical thing.
Novice question here, just because I'm a little bit of a numbers guy. So that frequency of 60 hertz or 50 in the US, or vice versa, US, Europe, where does that go down to like 49, 48, 45, or are we talking like 49.9, 49.8 kind of?
Or
even less.
We're in serious trouble if we even lose 1 hertz. Okay. So if we go from a 60 to a 59, we're in pretty big trouble. We need to be activating recovery systems right away. And so it is a very tight tolerance that we have around the frequency, because it's fundamentally it's the balance between generation and load. And if you have too much of one or the other, the grid can collapse very quickly.